Welcome everybody to an exciting session, because I sometimes feel like we're at the pointy end of power here, especially very much welcoming Senator David Shoebridge, who's in the Australian Parliament. So really massive to have his support and passion and interest in cannabis law reform in federal Parliament. It's quite extraordinary. So thank you so much for long-time supporter and keeping the flag flying. It's awesome, and also, totally fearless in doing it as well. So that's another aspect that we're very grateful for. And today, David is joined by Mandy Nolan, who is a really famous person in Northern Rivers. I'm sure we've all seen her very rude comedy shows. But Mandy is going to be the Greens candidate for the federal division of Richmond, so best wishes for that. And so this session, Mandy and David are going to let us know about their plans for legalising cannabis for recreational adult use. There's a lot of discussion about medical, but I think a lot of people here are also interested in adult use. So thank you very much, guys. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just going to correct that. I'm actually going to be the MP, but I am the candidate. Yeah. Don't worry, when I get in, everyone gets weed. It's not called... That's my favourite thing, actually, David, I have to say, is tweed heads, is this ongoing... It's a cultural phenomenon that someone has the job to go and paint out the T on tweed heads to keep it. And I feel like it's manifesting a better future for us all. And speaking of that, I'd like to start today, of course, by acknowledging that we are meeting today on beautiful Bundjalung country and acknowledge, the wisdom, the cultural traditions and the stories of First Nations people that have come before us, that have sat and gathered and shared knowledge and conversation, because this process of meeting and talking is a process which is really deeply embedded within First Nation culture. So really acknowledging how incredibly important First Nation knowledge and conversation and acknowledgement is. So acknowledging those elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledging that we all work together towards First Nation justice. So thank you. And this is a conversation about justice today. And before... It is called, the session is called Uppers and Lowers, and as you know, Senator David Shoebridge is a New South Wales Greens Senator in the federal upper house, and that is, David came up with this name for this session. I think it's genius, but David's going to explain the bill, I'll explain the joke. So uppers is the upper house, and that is where the bill is right now, right? And that's us trying to get it, it's getting it into Parliament, to getting it into the conversation, actually getting, the other parties and the independents kind of having the conversations and taking forward what happens at festivals like this that have been raising this conversation and been doing the advocacy for such a long time. That's happening in the upper house. And the lowers in the thing is about what happens in the lower house, right? It is the lowers. That's it's kind of like uppers and downers, I guess.
Yeah, Mandy wouldn't let me call it uppers and downers because she didn't want to be the downer, you see. So, I
know, so I got to be the lower. So it's basically, we'll talk about it, we'll get to that at the end, but it's basically, it's a two-pronged strategy. Is if, to get a bill through Parliament, it has to go through, well, if it starts in the upper house, it has to go to the upper house, it has to be worked on, goes to the lower house, goes back to the upper house, and then eventually, that can become, that becomes law, basically. So, and if it doesn't happen, we'll probably reverse it up and we're going to keep doing it. Like this is a conversation we're going to keep having, because we're going to keep pushing for this bill to get through, because it is so important that, this happens, and that for the community in our region here, but I think for the greater community of Australia. So,
Mandy, that was quite a long explanation of the joke.
I know. I was trying to.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, I know, it was a long... I think some of the weed that I was given here has rubbed off. Actually, I did get given, and that's part of why we're here today, I was given a very strong joint, and I'd like to be able to smoke it one day. And that is the real reason why I'm here, because I'd like to be able to smoke it and legally drive home, you know, not under the influence, but within 2 weeks. So let's start this conversation with some definitions, because right now, you know, there's a legalising cannabis bill that is in the Senate, which David Shoebridge has put forward. It's coming up again for discussion on the 10th of May. But let's talk now, just getting back to, I guess, the definitions and defining, David, because sometimes it gets a bit difficult to understand the difference, because like in ACT, marijuana and cannabis is decriminalised. But what is the difference from a legal framework between decriminalising and legalising?
Yeah, well, thanks, Mandy. And we did acknowledge the country we're on. And in doing that, I think we should also acknowledge how much criminalising cannabis impacts on First Nations peoples, and how the over-policing of First Nations peoples, often that first interaction with First Nations peoples when cops are walking down the street, it's about searching for cannabis, suspicion of possession of cannabis. And if we can take that away from the police, and we can have I think, a major step forward to First Nations justice. So when we're acknowledging First Nations justice, what we're all doing here collectively about trying to decriminalise and legalise cannabis, I reckon that's a big step forward for First Nations justice. So the difference between legalising and decriminalising. So the ACT has taken a bunch of really positive steps. And I'd say this is the benefit of having Greens literally as like a critical, co-equal third party down in the ACT. Labor can't get into government without the Greens. Issue for the Greens is you're going to sort out some of this drug stuff, and the decriminalising of cannabis has progressed over the last 5 years down in the ACT. So in the ACT, if you get caught with cannabis by the police, it's not a criminal offence, it's more like a traffic fine. And the police can confiscate the cannabis, but you don't get a criminal offence. And you can grow up to 4 plants in the ACT without facing a criminal penalty. But it's illegal to sell it. It's illegal to have an industry that manufactures it. It's all that kind of personal use and a little bit of personal growing. And that means the overwhelming bulk of the market in the ACT is still, you know, a legal market. It's still controlled by people who, you know, some of them are ethical, but a bunch of them aren't. There's no quality control. It's still an illegal market. And if you're caught selling cannabis in any way in the ACT, you still go to jail for a big chunk of time if it's any kind of commercial trade. Legalising cannabis, though, creates a legal market. So not only, it's not just decriminalised to possess it, you don't get a traffic fine at all. It's no different if you're an adult to having alcohol, to having cannabis, to having paracetamol on you. It's legal to possess it, it's legal to sell it, it's legal to manufacture it, it's legal to consume it, and you create a sort of open, clear legal market where you totally get the cops out of it. I mean, how you do that, you know, the models you choose to legalise cannabis, I suppose that's something we'll talk about, but that's the critical difference. Legalising cannabis means it's a legal product. It's no longer sitting there in the sort of dark reaches. Decriminalising is a kind of halfway house. It's not a crime to be possessing a small amount of it, but it's still a crime if you want to have any commercial production of it.
That's a good explanation. And I think something that most of us would, you know, really, you know, I don't think you have to be someone who is a regular user to benefit from the change socially of what. And I think sometimes we get caught up in whether or not we use a drug, and as that somehow impacts in the argument of whether or not we support legalisation or not. And I think we're talking about criminalisation and the impact of policing. How would you see, you know, I guess that changing quickly? You know, just explain the bill a little bit. Does that have powers to retrospectively kind of wipe people's, you know, if you've got a criminal history?
You've gone to expungement.
Is that
you
expungement?
You said you wouldn't do expungement.
I didn't even know what expungement was. They told me expungement before, and I said, I can't bring up something I don't know what the word means, and I just expunged myself. Is that expungement?
That's expungement.
Huh. Well, is expungement a thing? Can we talk straight to expungement?
I thought we'd get to expungement later, but so what the bill does, and we introduced it in August into the Federal Senate, and there's this kind of stage process. You go, first read, second read, third read. If you get a third read, then bells go off, confetti comes from the roof, and it's passed the House. It's only at the second read stage at the moment, and it's gone off into a parliamentary inquiry. And we had a hearing in Brisbane earlier this year into it, and we've had hundreds and hundreds of submissions, overwhelmingly supporting our bill to legalise cannabis. And legalise cannabis not for one state or one territory, but legalise cannabis for the entire country. Create a national legal market for cannabis. So let's get there as quick as we can. And I got to tell you, when we started the process, the first question you have when you're dealing with stuff in the federal parliament is, can the federal parliament do it? Because there's this annoying thing called the Constitution. And the Constitution says states can pretty much do whatever they like. So, we've got Sue Higgins in here somewhere. I think it's quite dangerous. She can do basically anything as a state MP. But in the federal parliament, and I think Kate's here as well. I mean, the thought of Kate and Sue running loose with unlimited power in the state parliament scares me. So states can pretty much do anything, but the federal parliament can only do stuff that the Constitution says they can do. And there's this long list in the Constitution. And so we needed to create a piece of legislation that fits into the Commonwealth powers, the constitutional powers. And we went and got some constitutional legal advice from kind of like the guy who writes the textbook on the Constitution. We thought that was a good starting point, Professor Patrick Kaiser. And I had a cunning plan to use the foreign affairs power, the external affairs power. He was very polite about my cunning plan, but he said it probably wouldn't work. And he said we use like the patents power, the trade, the corporations power, a bunch, and maybe, he was polite, we could lean into the external affairs power. But he gave us a pathway to create national legislation that if we get it through the Commonwealth Parliament, and we make it legal at a Commonwealth level to possess and manufacture and sell cannabis subject to licensing, then all of those state laws that make it a crime and the territory laws that make it a crime, they basically get turned off. And that's how the Constitution works. It's like big dog, little dog. If the federal parliament passes it, then all those shitty laws at a state level that make it a crime, they just get turned off. And I reckon that would be a bloody big win for the country. So that's what we did. We went through a long process. We went through a long consultation process about what the shape of the bill should be before we introduced it into Parliament. We had an online submission guide, and normally when you go to the public and you ask for submissions about a draft piece of legislation, you get, I don't know if it all goes really well, do you want to talk about this draft piece of legislation? You get maybe 100 people or maybe 200 people. If it goes nuts, you get maybe 500 people.
How many did you get?
Almost 9,000 people went through and did our survey.
Wow.
In support of legalising cannabis.
Hey, and they say pot smokers don't follow through. That shows you.
Yeah, and it was like a 15-minute engagement.
That's great.
I suppose it depends what state of mind you're in. As a general rule, about a 15-minute engagement to go through and give their views about our draft piece of legislation. And actually, not only did we ask people about what they thought about our draft bill, we then changed our draft bill given what they told us, which we thought was an unusual process.
That is, what did you change in particular in response to what people told you?
We made it really clear, for example, that when we create this new legal market, we wanted to prioritise pretty much local growing, and we wanted to disempower big pharma, big tobacco and big alcohol. And so we made it illegal for big pharma, big alcohol and big tobacco to be any part of the legal market.
How good is that? What is the response? I think that's an exciting and sexy part of the Legalise bill, isn't it? That is. So tell me what Localise looks like.
Yeah. So we set up the bill proposes a new national cannabis regulator called Cannabis Australia National Authority.
It's not all government, is it? Is it government and industry?
No, we'll get to that.
Okay, sorry.
And our original proposal actually had that this new national authority would be largely funded by the industry, be funded by levies and licence fees from the industry. And actually, in the process of consulting about it and now going through the Senate inquiry, we've had a lot of people say, well, actually, do you really want the industry to be funding the regulator? Because you might put in a kind of noxious, it's called regulatory capture, where if the regulator thinks it only survives from funds that comes from the industry, the regulator might be trying to actually help out the industry rather than regulate in the public interest. So we've taken that on board, and we actually now want to make sure the regulator is actually paid out of general revenue and not regulated. So it's been that kind of iterative process as we go through. But this new regulator will issue licences for the growing of cannabis, for any kind of manufacturing, if you want to make edibles or drinks or product to be smoked, that will issue licences for that kind of manufacturing level, and then also issue licences for the sale of cannabis, largely through dispensaries and cannabis cafes. And we then also asked about, okay, we create that market, do we want to kind of prioritise cooperatives and smaller kind of collectives at any one point? And people said, yeah, they do. The growing of cannabis in particular, they wanted to prioritise cooperatives and not corporates.
That makes sense because from a philosophical point of view, because this is it kind of fits with the ethos. It just feels wrong to have corporations producing cannabis. It feels like it goes against the deep counterculture. I hate to say it, the vibe of the thing, but it's true. Like actually, so how would it work? Like, are you talking non-for-profits?
We're talking not-for-profits, cooperatives and individuals largely at that growing level. And one of the reasons we wanted to do that was we see this as a massive economic opportunity for the regions in particular. And we didn't want the profits from growing to be sucked up into a couple of big corporate giants. And we've kind of seen that to a degree in Canada, in different states in the United States, where the wealth that comes from legalising cannabis has kind of been sucked up into a few corporates. And having a look at the way that played out, we crafted a bill that consciously wanted to empower, say, cooperatives in a place like the Northern Rivers, smaller scale growing, although that will still provide plenty of product to create a really vibrant legal market. But we really wanted to prioritise that. We wanted to see the best Nimbin Blue being sold through a cooperative rather than it sort of being stolen by a multinational corporation.
Yeah, and does that, which is a great idea, isn't it? Because you're localising in sort of a way that wine growers, in a sense, do. But how do you ensure that? Are you ensuring that the money sold or gathered from Nimbin Blue comes back into the community? Maybe talk a little bit about how, as part of the bill, perhaps the taxing and I guess also the cost to the users, which is really important because the cost can't be prohibitive. It can't be more than what you can buy it for on the black market.
Yeah, look, again, we looked around the world and tried to work out from the experience of now, the better part of a decade in Canada, what we've seen in different states in the US, what's likely to happen when you legalise cannabis, and how do we want to get as rapidly to a pretty much fully legal market rather than continue to have a whole lot of black market product. And so in the federal parliament, we're really lucky. We've got this independent bunch of number crunchers and boffins called the Parliamentary Budget Office. And they're literally like a bunch of boffins who cost policies. That's what they love, costing policies. And I had a meeting with them just last week, and there's 6 people, and they have thought 5 times more densely about this issue that I was discussing with them than I had last week. And we said to them, well, look, if we legalise cannabis and we look at what's happened in Canada and we look at what happens in the US, and we put in place cannabis, once it's sold, would get 10% GST, and we proposed also a 15% cannabis tax or a 25% cannabis tax. Now that's vastly lower than what tobacco gets taxed at, and it's lower than a bunch of alcohol taxes, but similar to some other alcohol taxes. So we said, what would happen with a 15% or a 25% cannabis tax. And we are kind of most interested in a 15% cannabis tax. And they said with a 15% cannabis tax and GST, over the first not quite a decade, it would produce about $30 billion in public revenue if we legalise cannabis. And I reckon that's pretty good.
That's pretty good, isn't it, considering when you look at the judicial costs.
It's half a sub.
Yeah, it was half a sub. And I mean, if you're actually doing, I imagine this would have been, for people at the Parliamentary Budget Office, of all the things they have to cost, this would have been like, they would love this. Because it's actually, it's kind of it's a cool thing to cost out, because then you have to look at, I mean, if you look at, I think 91% of people who are arrested or charged with cannabis-based offences are users, but I don't know the percentage of how many of those people end up in our prisons, because that must actually, it's not only what it returns, it's the burden of cost that we already carry, not just, I mean, socially and, I guess personally for people that have to, endure that.
Yeah, so because we did it at a federal level, and most of the costs of jailing people and cops and all that kind of misery that comes from the war on cannabis, that largely happens at a state level.
Right.
The $30 billion is just the upside of revenue. It doesn't include the billions and billions and billions of dollars we would save from not policing cannabis, jailing people, driving people through the criminal justice system, screwing up people's lives and careers and travel plans because of a possession charge. But to give you an idea of the numbers, it's about between 60 and 80,000 people a year, every year, are ground through the criminal justice system where their primary offence that they're going before the courts is possession of cannabis. So we take 60 to 80,000 people out of the criminal justice system, stop mucking around with their lives and all the costs associated with that. So the $30 billion doesn't include that. But for me, that getting 60 to 80,000 people, largely poorer people in regional Australia, First Nations people, getting them out of the criminal justice system for the crime of choosing to have a joint rather than a beer, that's a big win for me of itself. I do it just for that. I mean,
that's an extraordinary number, 60 to 80,000. If you take those people out of the justice system, you might actually be able to do something, useful with domestic violence and prosecuting there, actually shifting focus perhaps
could
a little.
you imagine? I mean, I think I've seen less cops this year at MardiGrass. Have people felt that? Less cops? Do you get a sense that maybe they thought in the middle of a domestic violence crisis, it would be a really shit look to put a whole lot of policing cannabis, and maybe they've taken a bit of a meta message? Well, why don't we take that message to Parliament in Macquarie Street, and we'll take that message to Canberra, and we'll make it policy that we don't waste a whole lot of cops' time on policing cannabis. That would be a bloody good outcome.
Good point. Because we will be getting to questions too. I see someone at the back. When we get to that point, I'll make sure you're first up on that one. I just wanted to, before we move away from this part of the conversation, within the bill, I'm interested how we address the black market and what impact you might think. Can I just tell you it's kind of a slightly funny story about the black market. No, I don't know, has anyone else had a strange experience with the black market? Anyway, I wasn't selling anything on the black market, just letting you know. It's not like, it's Facebook farmers, it's not that sort of thing. But I was staying at someone's house who I know might have been a person who sold drugs on the black market, just staying there. I don't know if that's illegal or even saying it.
Going to their house is not illegal.
I've got no idea. Anyway. I was there, I had a partner at the time who'd gone out and didn't come home, so I was really worried. And I stayed up all night drinking tea, because I'm a Nazi, drinking tea, worried. And the next day when the person who made quite a lot of money out of the black market came home, I told them I'd been drinking tea, and they go, "Oh no, you haven't been using the kettle." And then he opened up the kettle and it was stacked full of money, and I'd been boiling up dirty drug money and drinking it all night. I feel dirty inside, just telling you. You can't imagine. I had like 10 cups of tea.
I hope they were polymer notes.
They were the old 50s. the real kind of fleshy, kind of bacteria absorbent ones. So I am very invested in really talking about the black market and how we might actually sort of expunge.
Well, you've got to keep, a complex biome in your
I
tummy.
know.
So that's probably a really good thing.
So how would this? Sorry, I've never told anyone that really disgusting story, but that is my experience of the black market. But it's inside me, in my biome. But how will this? Like, how does shifting? Because what we're essentially doing through this bill is saying no to corporations and big pharma, big tobacco, big alcohol, but also big black market.
Yeah. So I was telling you about there's the boffins in the Parliamentary Budget Office, and they are super smart.
Are they?
They're super capable, and they had a look at the international experience, and their analysis was that even with like a 15% cannabis tax and a 10% GST, that the street price of cannabis when we legalise it will, over the first 5 years, from the current black market price, will basically halve over the first 5 years. And in fact, the tax revenue drops down slightly after the first 5 years, because the assumption is once you legalise it and you get rid of all the extra normal profits you can squeeze out if you're selling it through an illegal market, you get rid of all the inefficiencies, you create a legal, efficient, well-regulated market. I'm told it grows like a weed. And actually the retail price halves.
Yeah.
And so when the retail price halves in the legal market, that basically just washes out 90% of the black market. And I reckon that's a pretty amazing outcome, because then when people are growing cannabis, instead of having to run and hide from the police and do it in a kind of, with a bunch of subterfuge, you can actually have a business. You can employ people. You can pay them fair wages. You can bring that money back into town. You can establish another small business to manufacture it. And it all comes out of the dark, and it's great for places like Nimbin. You get the police out of it, but also it's a cost of living measure. You halve the price of cannabis in the first 5 years. I reckon that's a pretty good outcome.
I think it's very good. I love how you said we get the police out of it, which I've always thought was a really good solution in a deep empathy work. But
well, let's be frank about it. Once we legalise a drug, you get rid of all the corrupting stuff that happens with the billions and billions and billions of dollars that people make from illegal drugs.
Yeah.
And you would be foolish to think that that isn't used to corrupt the system, right? Of course, if you want to keep your billions and billions and billions of dollars of profit going to the usual suspects who are making it in a legal market, they're willing to pay to keep their market running. And that, of course, puts pressure on the judicial system, pressure on the police. You get rid of all that corrupting stuff. We pretend that just by making it illegal, something you're going to have, that will somehow work. Obviously, there's a lot of cannabis going around. Obviously, a bunch of police know where a bunch of that cannabis is. And why wouldn't we get rid of the corruption risk, if for no other reason? Get rid of the corruption risk.
I think it does seem like, from a logic point of view and an ethical point of view, it's the clearest, most humanitarian and most, I would think, economical and safe, both health-wise and socially, pathway. Yet there are people heavily invested in not having this happen. So how do we then, when we're pushing up against corporations and incredibly wealthy people within the black market, what is the likelihood? I mean, what is the support that we have for this across the community? And is it enough, do you think, to get it across? Because obviously there's big, powerful players that don't want to see this happen.
So I know we want to get to questions, so we'll try and run through this. Of course, we have a bunch of people say to us, well, you should let big pharma, big alcohol and big tobacco have a go in this, because then they'll be on your side to legalise it. And maybe some of them will, but we wanted to put out what we think would be the best public interest legislation we could possibly do. And And I reckon there is. The alcohol industry does not want us to legalise cannabis. They do not want us to legalise cannabis because when you look at the data from the US in particular, a bunch of state analysis, you see a translation, less alcohol consumed and slightly, in some cases, slightly more cannabis consumed. And every time you see that happen, public health experts will tell you there's a significant public health benefit because cannabis is, significantly less damaging drug than alcohol. I'm not pretending...
And we won't be putting pokey machines in cannabis cafes.
Well, yeah, that was part of our original plan, obviously, was to have pokey palaces full of cannabis. And in fact, and sometimes, we talk about the difficulties in the law and all this. One of the things we wanted people to think about is what a legal, well-regulated legal cannabis market would look like. And it would look like when you've had a really shit week in the Senate and you've worked a really long week and it's late on Friday and you're a bit ragged, instead of going to the pub, you could actually go to a cannabis cafe which is chilled out and relaxed, maybe have a cannabis matcha latte because I'm a Green senator, and just a totally relaxing, positive, different way of being an adult. And let's get there as soon as we can. And yeah.
Before we go to questions, and I'll go to question after this one question. I've got someone at the back, and then I'll come to you, number 2, and then you, number 3, Chris. I just wanted to reflect back to one of the items in the bill, and something I know that got quite a bit of feedback in the survey was around labelling. And we've seen that. I was surprised, not surprised, I guess I was surprised how important people are saying accurate labelling is. Do you mind expanding a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, so most people want to know what's in the kettle, you see.
Yeah.
They don't want to be surprised about what's in the kettle. And it's the same with what's in the edibles, and it's the same in what's in your cannabis. You want to know what you're putting in your body. And when we legalise it and we have a regulator who can test for quality and test for product and take someone's licence off them if they're not producing in accordance with their licence conditions, you suddenly know what you're going to be putting in your body. And so with a legal market comes labelling about where it was grown, ensuring that it's not full of a bunch of toxic chemicals, that they're all washed out. If any chemicals are used, they're definitely washed out. Maybe it's organic and truth in labelling. It tells you the strength. With that comes a huge amount of information because people want to know and they have a right to know, and the only way you get there is through a legal market.
Yeah, absolutely. Also letting you know that we are talking about 18 plus, and we are talking also about legally being able to grow 6 plants at home. So
without a license, without tax, you can just grow up to 6 at home.
Yeah.
Again, we consulted on that.
Yeah.
Because our original draft said 6. We had a small number of people say, why should there be any limit? We should grow as much as we can. We had another group of people that said 6 is too many. We had another group of people said, 6 females, but as many males. We had some that said 6 little ones and 6 big ones and 9 this and 9 that. And so, there's no perfect answer to it, right? But you need something that is clear, something that kind of gets the middle ground. And overwhelmingly, we had people say 6 plants gets it about right. And so to answer those questions that are going to come, yes, you can have 2 seedlings, 2 mother of all ones that grow to the roof, and 2 in the middle. It's 6. And we think that's about right.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure there's people here that have been charged on tiny seedlings as it is, which seems crazy because if you're a very unsuccessful gardener like myself, you need about 50 seedlings to get one thing that actually makes
6,
it through.
Mandy,
6, apparently 6. I'll be going to the cafe. I'm going to go to a question at the back. We've got, thanks Olivia. Olivia is going to bring the microphone. I think we've got one there, one there, one there. Is anyone else? Expungement. Expungement.
Oh, thank you.
I love that.
Well, that also plays into one of my questions because I have a few questions. Is there a place for a clemency program in your legislation for people that have been healing people before the laws changed? And is there a chance that they're still going to be allowed in a legal regulated market?
Yeah, so there's no provision in the thing that says you can't get a licence if you have a prior criminal conviction. So we think I don't know if you saw what happened in New York, for example, when they legalise it in New York, they basically excluded anyone who'd ever had a criminal conviction, and therefore anyone who'd been selling product at any point illegally, including people who'd been providing for medicinal purposes and oils for medicinal purposes, they were just basically wiped out of the market, the legal market straight away. New York learned from that and actually changed their laws. So there's no prohibition on getting a licence if you have a prior criminal record.
Fantastic.
And we thought, again, it was learning from the rest of the world. We can't, I told you about the Constitution, and you can only do certain stuff federally. So at a federal level, we can't wipe away all the past convictions that happen at a state or a territory level.
Yeah.
But as soon as we legalise it federally, that will massively empower, MPs like Sue and Kate and others at a state level to say, well, it's no longer a crime. Why are we still leaving people with criminal convictions? And then I would imagine within the months and years that follow, every state and territory will do expungement laws.
An expungement.
To expunge all past convictions, particularly for possession.
What about on that, and I'll let you, because you've brought that up, is that drug driving laws are also state laws, and that's something that people need to change as well. What's the likelihood of being able to get state laws and territory laws changed in relationship with the change of legalising cannabis?
I want to be clear. I was a state MP before I became a senator, and we fought tooth and nail to get rid of those crap drug driving laws. No one should be able to drive when they're impaired by a drug. I don't care if it's legal or illegal. If you can't properly control a vehicle because you've got a drug in your system, whether it's prescription benzos or alcohol. I wasn't pointing at you directly there, Mandy. She took that kind of badly, didn't she? Prescription benzos. Or cannabis or any drug, you should not drive impaired, right? And the test should be about impairment. And that's what we do with alcohol. And it's crazy that the test for cannabis is the merest, slightest detectable presence.
Yeah.
But again, constitutionally, we can't get rid of that in this bill. We need state and territories to do it. But the only reason we have that dumb law on cannabis, the only possible justification for it is because cannabis is illegal and therefore any drug cannabis is really bad. And once it's no longer illegal, there is absolutely no justification at all for those stupid drug driving laws. And again, it'll be this huge impetus to finally get the states and territories to make it about impairment, because that's about road safety impairment.
Did you have one more question?
I do have another question, and it's a constitutional issue, and it's in regarding the irradiation of cannabis. So all legislatively prescribed cannabis at the moment is irradiated in Australia, both produced domestically and internationally. Within their website, the irradiation company admits that they are destroying the terpenes within the product. They do not disclose to what degree or percentage that they're damaging the terpenes in it. So we're already being given a subpar medicine that's already been impacted by legislative overreach as far as I'm concerned. And then subject to Section 5123A of the Constitution, where the federal government's allowed to legislate for medical services, but not so as to authorise any form of civil conscription. Within the new legislative framework, do you believe, David, that would therefore open us up to being able to stop civil conscription for irradiation, for instance?
Well, good question. This of course, won't be a medicinal product. This will be a recreational product. And therefore, there won't be any basis upon which for the Constitution to go down that pathway and demand the irradiation of the product. It'll be a recreational product, and there's absolutely nothing in the bill that would give the regulator the power to impose that kind of condition. So I don't see it as an issue. I'll keep an eye out for it, though, if someone tries to sort of push it in through the side door. But under the bill we have, the regulator wouldn't have the power to impose that kind of condition as a licence condition.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
So good work, David.
Thank you. Yes, good work, David. And I guess it would be good to push for, not irradiating the most active and components of a medicinal substance out of the substance, which might be a part of actually decorporatising and localising production, I would imagine. Yes? We're just waiting for the microphone. No,
I was wondering what the next steps are for the bill and when you think it'll actually come up for a vote. And if it does pass, how long do you think it would take to set up the CAN agency or CANA agency and for us to actually be able to walk into some place and legally buy our first weed?
Really good question. We've got another hearing day for the bill in the Senate inquiry that I'm on. I'm on that committee. That's on Friday of next week down in Canberra. So if anyone, wants a fun field trip to Canberra, come down and watch the one day of largely people saying, yes, get on and legalise cannabis, really key stakeholders. That's the last hearing day we're going to have. We're then going to write a report. It's a committee that is dominated by Labor MPs. That's just the committee that's doing the inquiry. If they collectively don't support the bill, I and any independents on the committee can write an alternate report and say why it should be supported. That's all going to wrap up pretty much by the end of this month in one way or another, and we're going to see the committee report land into the Senate chamber pretty much by the end of this month sometime, maybe early next month. And then our plan is to bring it on for a vote. As you know, I want to get my Greens colleagues to collectively find the time to bring it on for a vote in the second half of this year and continue our public campaign with the millions and millions of Australians who want this to happen to put pressure on Labor and the Coalition to actually support it and get it through. If that did happen and we got it through the Senate, it'd then go to the lower house. That'd probably be another month or so. The lower house will do whatever it does. If it passes it, we would expect it to be implemented within about 12 months after that. So by the end of next year, we'd be having a legal market. Now, of course, that's I'm pretty excited by that timetable. Like, that would be extraordinary. As I said, it's the first time ever that anyone has tried to legalise cannabis in the federal parliament. First time ever. And huge support for the bill and huge support for the structure we're putting in place. But if Labor and the Coalition decide to say no to this, do you know what's going to happen in the first half of next year? A nice little federal election, and millions of people can make their passion known in the next federal election. And one of the reasons we called this uppers and lowers was if we're in the balance of power, and we're already in the balance of power in the Senate, if we're in the balance of power in the Senate and the lower house, and somebody needs our vote to form government, that is the best possible opportunity we have to put the screws on to say this is also critical for us to legalise cannabis and get it done straight after the next federal election. So we are multiple plans about how to get this through the Parliament.
Yes. So that being said, we're committed to getting this through. So we will campaign on it and we'll push it through until we legalise cannabis, either through the upper.
I'd like to see the member for Richmond introduce it downstairs. That's what I'd like to see, actually.
That would be great. That being said, what's your feeling of the barriers to right now politically of how people are sitting within Labor and the Coalition, from your own sense of conversations that you've had about where they sit on this?
Look, a whole lot of individual MPs say to me, oh yes, absolutely, we should be doing this. It's stupid that it's still illegal. I say, well, vote that way, vote that way. Oh, the party, and I've got to do this in the party, and blah, 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 blah. And so there's still institutional opposition. Let's not pretend otherwise. There's institutional opposition in the Labor Party. There's institutional opposition in the Liberal Party and the National Party. I mean, why the National Party as opposed to having a new legal crop? I can't work out. But anyhow, so I don't think we should pretend it's easy. And I don't think we should pretend they're all just suddenly going to pack up their tents and agree with us in the second half of this year. But increasingly, they don't have a basis upon which to say no. They just say no because they've always said no. But they kind of feel embarrassed by it. And none of them are proactively attacking us on it, because every time they go out and attack us as Greens for trying to legalise cannabis, they get the crap beaten out of them on social media. They get like 900 comments saying, what's wrong with you, you dinosaur? Get on board and legalise cannabis. Well, so we've got this institutional opposition, but that is so weak and fragile at the moment. And that's why I think we've got the best opportunity in my entire political career to get this thing done. Yeah,
and you can see, even in the most conservative electorates like Dixon, which is Peter Dutton's electorate, that there's a growing support to legalise cannabis. Like, if they say no to it, they're going to have to face the wrath of a community.
Can I point out one quick thing about Dutton's seat? Louis, Sue,
wait for the microphone.
I can't help myself. I've just got to point out this amazing young person in the back here who ran against Dutton and gave him the best run for his money. And he ran the most positive, amazing campaign. And I really want him to run again.
Yes, can you, Vincent? It's Vincent, isn't it? Yeah, Vinny, thank you. Question here, I think, Chris?
There's a mic, Chris.
Just behind you.
Yeah, behind you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's amazing to hear all this stuff from Mandy and yourself. You mentioned like a tax, right? And I cannot prevent myself saying that tax is 100% unnecessary. I studied law at Southern Cross, where David Healpern is my lecturer, and we could choose our own first assignment. I chose banking is fraud. I rang the Reserve Bank, eventually talked to the official spokesperson for the economic research branch of the Reserve Bank, who said these words to me, verbatim: there is no limit to the amount of credit the trading banks can create from nothing. And I'm a law student listening to this. 97% of the money is just fictional. So you just give a bit of fictional money to the government to run itself. No need for taxation. You have 1/10 of the value of everything for sale available for free to everybody. Then everything's sold, no inflation, no taxation. So I would implore of you we should speak about this, please.
Well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of theories about how tax works, how the financial system works. But I reckon if I tried the legalising cannabis and totally revolutionising our tax system and our financial system, that'd be actually harder to get that legislation through by the end of this year. And I suppose we've got to pick our battles at this point. And one of the reasons we have the 15% cannabis tax as part of the package we're proposing is because $30 billion of revenue is 30 billion good reasons to get a bunch of other politicians to come on board, because that's a lot of public schools, that's a lot of nurses, that's a lot of really good things we can do as well. And we're trying to build a kind of, a team in Parliament within the Greens and outside the Greens. We're trying to build the team, build the tent and get as many people on board. And $30 billion is a lot of good reasons to get a bunch of other politicians on board.
Yeah, absolutely. It creates kind of a social licence, doesn't it?
But I know there's heaps of critique, and I don't mean to minimise your question. There's heaps of critique about the way the financial system works, how our tax system works. It's skewed against ordinary people. That's one way of reforming it, and I don't mean to minimise it. It's just we can't do that through a legalising cannabis bill.
Yeah.
I appreciate the question. Yeah.
We're just going to go here.
So, David, could you tell us all, what can we all do to help you help us legalise cannabis? What can we all do as individuals to help you out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would love to have more of us in the federal parliament. I'd love to see Mandy in there as seat of Richmond, come in with that kind of power and enthusiasm to do it. I think that would be great. I'll be quite frank with you. Getting Mandy elected would be a big step forward to getting cannabis legalised, because she'd be great. Despite, being a downer. She would be amazing. You all have a bunch of senators. All of you have got 12 senators, unless you live in the ACT or the NT, when you've only got 2. But, and you've all got a lower house MP. Send them an email. Find out where they are. Call them up. Tell them it's important to you. And tell them if they vote this bill down, they're never going to get your vote ever again. That is a really powerful thing you can do. I can tell you, when my office starts getting phone calls, and a whole bunch of phone calls about something, suddenly, they report it up to me and say, hey, this thing's really gone off. This is really important. And that direct communication you have to your lower house MP, to your senators, I think is really, really important. Also, there's heaps of campaigning material you can download from our website. If you want stickers, you want some other material, you can email our office, we'll send it out to you. if you want to do some great stuff on 420, which we did together down in Adelaide. We always love doing a 420 event with people. And 420 every Friday, happens every Friday. So get out and do something in your local community as well. And fight the stigma, the pointless, stupid stigma about cannabis. Contact your MPs, get active in your local community, put on a 420 event, download the materials, and we're going to get there. And we're going to get there really bloody soon.
And vote green. I think we're at our, I'm so sorry, we're at our last. Do we have time for one quick question?
Okay,
Super
you've twisted my arm.
Okay, my issue's around the driving. So the first question is, if or when cannabis is legal, is there a possibility, or what is the likelihood of the government still putting driving impediments?
Yeah, so there's no good reason, apart from the fact that cannabis is illegal and therefore they take a zero tolerance approach to it. There's no other reason to try and take someone's license from them because they had a joint a week ago, right? There's no driver safety benefit from taking someone's license off them because they had a joint 2 days ago, 24 hours ago, or a week ago. The only reason those dumb laws exist, apart from providing a bunch of money to the corporations that sell all the drug testing kits to the police, the Maid Corporation of which is actually owned by some retired cops. But apart from that, the sort of money aspect of it, the only reason that we have the shit drug driving laws, the only reason they can ever try and sustain them is because cannabis is illegal and we're taking a zero tolerance approach to cannabis. So if cannabis is no longer illegal, there is no justification for those laws.
Okay,
and we will get to an impairment.
Yep.
We'll get to an impairment
And then
test.
the second quick question is that if one of the arguments now is that, like that the authorities give, is that it's illegal, then is it possible that they could just then... No, like if one of the arguments is that cannabis is the only pharmaceutical that has these strict driving laws, that's one of our arguments, right? Well, then could the authorities then just say, oh, well, then we'll just add benzo at all? Like could it backlash?
Well, I mean, they could already test. This isn't a drug driving thing, and we've got a broader political chat later, and we're happy to, I think, deal with some of the drug driving stuff. But the main testing unit that sits in all those police vans and caravans that sit on the side of the road after the oral swab, those testing units can already test for benzodiazepines if they want to. They could just switch the dial and test for benzodiazepines. And I don't know about you, but I don't want somebody driving on the road zonked to their eyeballs on benzodiazepines, right? I think that's a bad outcome.
But it might take away our argument.
But they choose not to, and I see no possible basis upon which they're going to start massively expanding the level of drugs they're testing into drugs which the pharmaceutical industry is getting billions and billions of dollars of profit from. And I think we should have a look at where real power lies in politics. I think it's highly unlikely they're going to take on that part of the pharmaceutical industry just to try and justify a really shit law about cannabis. I'm not saying they can't. Politicians do all sorts of stupid things. But I reckon that's an unlikely pathway, because why would they take on a big multinational, multi-billion dollar industry just to keep doing something stupid on cannabis?
Yeah. So thank you so much. Step one is to legalise cannabis.
And we expunge.
And expunge.
Then we fix the drug driving laws.
Fix the drug driving laws. And so and part of that is by all of you doing that pressure from a grassroots place of actually calling in and harassing your MPs, letting them know that this is important to you, and that you want to see cannabis legalised. Thank you for turning up to this event today. Thank you so much to David Shoebridge for the amazing work and the Greens that they are doing with the first attempt to legalise cannabis in Australia.
And I want to do a shout out to my team, Olivia and others who are here helping out. In fact, Sue's team as well, and Kate's team, and Mandy here, being here at MardiGrass, being here with our teams, getting a sense of all the passion that you guys have about getting this stuff sorted. It's really important to us. This is, I don't know, my 10th MardiGrass, I can't remember. We take a huge amount of positive energy from this interplay and the enthusiasm and the support you have. So thanks to everybody here, thanks to my team, and thanks to Mandy for being funny. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to my team. Thank you.
And everyone, don't forget...